He thought the storm would kill him that night, but what it revealed instead was a secret buried for 40 years, a vault holding $275 million, and a chance for one broken veteran to prove that honor doesn't die just because the world stops watching. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe, because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The desert sun beat down on the cracked pavement of Redstone, Arizona. Population 3,200, give or take whoever was passing through on Interstate 10. It was the kind of town people drove past without slowing down, where the gas station doubled as the grocery store and the biggest employer had closed 15 years ago. Dust coated everything, every window, every pickup truck, every dream that had tried to take root here and failed. Marcus Webb sat in the shade of an abandoned Shell station, his back pressed against sun-bleached concrete, his bad leg stretched out in front of him like a reminder of everything he used to be. He was 47 years old, but the desert and the years had carved him into something older, something weathered. His skin was tan and leathered, his beard streaked with grey, his hands scarred and calloused from a life that had demanded everything and given back almost nothing. Beside him sat a dented military canteen, half full of water he'd filled at a church spigot 3 blocks away. His backpack, olive green and fraying at the seams, contained everything he owned in this world: a change of clothes, an emergency blanket, a small first aid kit, a paperback book with no cover, and buried at the very bottom, wrapped carefully in a torn t-shirt, his dog tags, and a purple heart medal he couldn't bring himself to wear anymore. People walked past him like he was invisible. A mother pulled her child closer when they approached. A teenager in a lifted truck threw a half-empty soda can that clattered near his feet. Marcus didn't flinch, didn't react. He'd learned years ago that the world didn't see him anymore. He was a ghost in plain sight, a man whose sacrifice had been honored with speeches and medals, but forgotten the moment the ceremony ended. His leg throbbed, the familiar ache that never quite left. Shrapnel from an IED in Helmand Province, Afghanistan, back in 2009. The explosion had killed 3 of his unit, men he'd trained with, laughed with, men who called him brother. Marcus had survived with a destroyed knee, nerve damage, and the kind of guilt that burrowed into your chest and made a home there. The doctors had done what they could: 7 surgeries, titanium pins, months of physical therapy. He could walk, but not without pain, not without the limp that marked him as damaged goods to every employer who watched him cross a room. The VA had given him pills and appointments, and a disability check that barely covered rent in the cheapest places. But pills couldn't silence the screams he heard at night, and appointments couldn't bring back the men who died while he lived. Marcus shifted his weight and watched the sky. Clouds were building to the west, dark and heavy, the kind that promised violence. Monsoon season in the desert was unpredictable, beautiful, and dangerous in equal measure. He'd need to find better shelter soon. The overpass where he usually slept would flood if the rain came hard enough. He thought about the construction site on the edge of town, the half-finished strip mall that had run out of funding 3 years ago. He'd stayed there before, in the shell of what was supposed to be a dollar store. But last week, security had chased him off, threatened to call the cops if he came back. Marcus didn't fear much anymore, but he feared jail, the small spaces, the loss of control, the memories that came screaming back when he couldn't move, couldn't run. A woman emerged from the gas station across the street, her arms full of grocery bags. She glanced his way for just a moment, and Marcus saw something flicker across her face. Not pity, not disgust, something else. Recognition, maybe, or just the universal discomfort of seeing suffering and not knowing what to do about it. She climbed into her minivan and drove away. Marcus closed his eyes and let himself remember, just for a moment, the man he used to be. Captain Marcus Webb, Army Corps of Engineers, explosive specialist, security systems expert. He'd been good at his job, damn good. They'd sent him into places where precision mattered, where one wrong move meant body bags and international incidents. He'd defused bombs in Iraq, secured forward operating bases in Afghanistan, trained local forces in counter-IED tactics. He'd also been a husband once, a father. Emma had been 4 years old when he deployed for his third tour. She'd clung to his leg at the airport, crying, begging him not to go. He'd promised her he'd come back, and he had, just not in any way that mattered. The man who came home wasn't the man who left. Sarah, his wife, had tried. God knows she'd tried. But the nightmares, the rage that came from nowhere, the drinking, the jobs he couldn't keep, it had worn her down until there was nothing left but divorce papers and a custody arrangement that gave him supervised visits he eventually stopped showing up for. Emma would be 16 now. Marcus didn't know for sure, didn't know what she looked like, what music she listened to, whether she still drew pictures like she used to. He'd made himself a ghost in her life because he believed it was better than being the drunk, broken thing that showed up late and smelled like whiskey and failure. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain and creosote. Marcus opened his eyes and watched the clouds race closer. He needed to move, needed to find shelter before the storm hit. He pushed himself up slowly, gritting his teeth against the pain that shot through his leg. The movement sent a wave of dizziness through him. He hadn't eaten since yesterday morning, a sleeve of crackers someone had left on a bench. He shouldered his backpack and started walking, limping south toward the outskirts of town. Maybe the arroyo, the dry wash that cut through the desert, would have an undercut he could shelter beneath. It was risky. Flash floods could turn a dry riverbed into a raging torrent in minutes. But he didn't have many options. The sky was the color of a bruise now, purple and green and angry. Thunder rumbled in the distance, low and threatening. Marcus walked past the last houses, past the town limit sign riddled with bullet holes, onto the dirt road that led into emptiness. Redstone didn't have suburbs. It just stopped. Civilization giving way to scrub brush and rock formations and the kind of silence that made you aware of how small you were. He'd been walking for maybe 20 minutes when the first drops hit, fat and cold against his sun-heated skin. Within seconds, it became a deluge. The desert couldn't absorb water this fast, and Marcus watched as the dry ground transformed into a maze of rivulets and streams. He picked up his pace, ignoring the screaming protest from his leg. Through the curtain of rain, he saw something he hadn't noticed before. A chain-link fence, partially collapsed, and beyond it, a concrete structure barely visible through the mesquite and palo verde trees. Not the arroyo, but something else. He changed direction, pushing through the broken fence. As he got closer, his military training kicked in despite the years and the distance. This wasn't random desert debris. The concrete was poured, intentional, a structure built to last. And there, barely visible beneath decades of blown sand and desert vegetation, were markings. Faded, but unmistakable to someone who'd spent years on military installations. Marcus's heart rate picked up. He approached carefully, eyes scanning for danger out of habit. The structure was mostly buried, just the top edge visible, but there was an opening, a metal hatch that had been partially uncovered, maybe by wind, maybe by the shifting earth, maybe by the same kind of luck that had kept him alive when better men died. The hatch was old, military-grade steel, and it bore stenciled numbers and letters that made Marcus's breath catch. The format, the style, it was Cold War era, probably 1960s or 70s, and there in one corner was a symbol he recognized, a classified designation that meant this place officially didn't exist. Lightning split the sky, thunder crashing so loud it felt like artillery. Marcus made a decision. He grabbed the handle of the hatch and pulled. It didn't budge. He tried again, putting his weight into it, and something gave, rust and time surrendering to necessity. The hatch groaned open, revealing darkness and a set of metal stairs leading down. Marcus didn't hesitate. He climbed through the opening and descended into the earth. The smell hit him first, stale air, dry and cold, but not musty like he expected. No mold, no decay, just the flat scent of a sealed space. He pulled his small flashlight from his backpack, the one he'd found in a dumpster behind an auto parts store, and clicked it on. The beam cut through absolute darkness, revealing a corridor. The walls were concrete, the floor steel grating, everything coated in a fine layer of dust, but otherwise intact. Emergency lighting fixtures lined the ceiling, dark and dead, or so he thought. As his eyes adjusted, he noticed a faint glow at the far end of the corridor, so dim it was almost imaginary. Marcus stood at the bottom of the stairs, water dripping from his clothes, and felt something he hadn't felt in years: purpose. This was a puzzle, a mission, something that required the skills he thought he'd left behind in the desert on the other side of the world. He moved forward slowly, his footsteps echoing on the metal grating. The corridor was maybe 50 feet long, with doors on either side, all closed, all bearing the same faded stencils and classification markers. At the end was a larger door, partially open, and that's where the light was coming from. Marcus approached the door and pushed it open slowly. Beyond was a room that made his breath catch. It was a command center, or had been decades ago. Banks of ancient computer equipment lined the walls, their screens dark but their indicator lights still glowing faintly, powered by something deep in the earth below. Maps covered one wall, not modern maps, but Cold War-era strategic displays showing Soviet targets and American defensive positions. In the center of the room was a desk, and on that desk was a binder. Marcus approached it like it might bite. The cover was labeled in neat block letters: Facility Operations Manual, Site 7 Delta, established 1963. He opened the binder with trembling hands. Inside were pages and pages of procedures, duty rosters, supply inventories, and something else, a mission statement. He read it slowly, his flashlight beam moving across words that had been written before he was born. This facility serves as a contingency financial repository for the continuity of government in the event of catastrophic national emergency. Assets stored herein are designated for post-conflict reconstruction, emergency currency backing, and maintenance of economic stability should primary Federal Reserve systems be compromised or destroyed. Marcus felt the words settle over him like weight. This wasn't just some abandoned bunker. This was a time capsule, a piece of Cold War paranoia made concrete and steel, a place where America had hidden treasure in case the world ended. He flipped through more pages: inventory lists, security protocols, access procedures. And then he found something that made his hands still. A page dated August 1987, a transfer of custodial responsibility form. The signature at the bottom was nearly illegible, faded with time, but Marcus would know his father's handwriting anywhere. Captain James Webb, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Marcus sat down hard in the ancient office chair, dust puffing up around him. His father, dead now 15 years, had never mentioned this place, never hinted at secret facilities or buried treasure or any of it. James Webb had been a quiet man, a career soldier who did his duty and came home and worked as a civil engineer until retirement. He'd died of a heart attack in his sleep, peacefully, leaving behind a small life insurance policy and a lot of unfinished conversations. But he'd been here, in this place, responsible for whatever was sealed in the earth beneath Marcus's feet. Marcus stood and moved deeper into the facility. More corridors branched off, leading to what looked like dormitories, a mess hall, storage rooms. He checked each one systematically, his training overriding his exhaustion. Everything was preserved, frozen in time, like everyone had simply walked out one day and never came back. In one of the storage rooms, he found supplies, canned goods, water in sealed containers, even medical supplies. The cans were decades old, but military-grade preservation meant many would still be good. Marcus's stomach growled, reminding him he hadn't eaten. He opened a can of beans, cold and congealed but edible, and forced himself to eat slowly. As he ate, he studied the facility maps mounted on the wall. The layout was extensive. This place went deep, multiple levels, and at the very bottom, marked with red shading and multiple security designations, was something labeled simply Primary Vault, Authorized Access Only. Marcus finished his beans and followed the map. He descended 2 more levels using stairs that his bad leg complained about with every step. The air grew colder, the silence more profound. He passed through what looked like multiple security checkpoints, all frozen open, their electronic locks long dead. And then he reached it. The corridor ended at a massive door, the kind of vault entrance you saw in movies but never expected to encounter in real life. It was easily 10 feet tall, circular, made of steel that looked thick enough to survive anything short of a nuclear blast. In the center was a combination lock, old-fashioned, mechanical, the kind that required precise knowledge of the sequence. Marcus approached slowly, his flashlight beam playing across the surface. There were no signs of forced entry, no evidence anyone had been here since the place was sealed. Dust covered everything in an undisturbed blanket. He placed his hand on the cold metal and felt the weight of it, the absolute finality of it. Whatever was behind this door had been locked away for decades, forgotten by the government that created it, hidden from the world that moved on without it. Marcus thought about the binder upstairs, the operations manual, the procedures. Somewhere in those pages would be the combination. Had to be. Protocol demanded it, a way for authorized personnel to access the vault in case of emergency. They wouldn't have created a system that locked them out of their own contingency funds. He turned to head back upstairs when something caught his eye. There, mounted on the wall beside the vault, was a small metal box, corroded but intact. He pried it open with his knife and found a laminated card inside, protected from time and moisture. On the card was a series of numbers and letters, clearance codes, authentication procedures, and at the bottom, in his father's handwriting, "For James, in case of emergency, the sequence is your mother's birthday and mine, reverse order." Marcus's throat tightened. His mother had been born April 14th, 1938. His father, September 23rd, 1935. Reverse order meant starting with his father's birthday. He turned back to the vault, his hands shaking now. This was real. This was actually happening. He approached the combination lock and began to turn the dial. Right to 9, left to 23, right to 35, left to 4, right to 14, and finally left to 38. Nothing happened. Marcus's heart sank. Maybe he'd misunderstood. Maybe the mechanism was frozen. Maybe... A deep thunk echoed through the corridor, so loud it made him jump. Somewhere inside the massive door, ancient machinery was waking up. Gears that hadn't moved in decades began to turn. The sound was grinding, painful, like the earth itself was protesting. Then, slowly, impossibly, the vault door began to swing open. The movement was glacial, inches at a time, the hinges screaming. Marcus stepped back, his flashlight beam swallowed by the darkness beyond. Cold air rushed out, not stale but preserved, sealed away from time. When the door finally stopped moving, leaving an opening just wide enough to enter, Marcus stood frozen. His heart hammered against his ribs. Every instinct told him to be careful, to think this through, to understand what he was about to step into. But another part of him, the part that had survived explosions and loss and years of nothing, urged him forward. This was why he'd found this place, why the storm had driven him here, why his father's handwriting had been waiting on that card. Marcus took a deep breath, gripped his flashlight, and stepped through the vault door into the darkness beyond. His flashlight beam swept across the space, and what he saw made him forget how to breathe. The vault was enormous, maybe 30 feet across and just as deep, and it was full, Metal containers stacked on steel shelves that lined every wall, each one labeled with codes and dates and inventory numbers. Marcus approached the nearest container and opened it with shaking hands. Inside, wrapped in protective plastic, were stacks of currency, $100 bills, 50s, 20s, all pristine, all perfectly preserved. The stack in his hands alone had to be $50,000. He moved to the next container, gold certificates backed by reserves that might or might not still exist. Another container held government bonds, bearer bonds that could be cashed by whoever possessed them. Marcus's mind raced, trying to calculate, trying to understand the scope of what he was looking at. He found a clipboard hanging near the door, an inventory list. His hands trembled as he lifted it and scanned the pages. The handwriting was meticulous, recording every container, every denomination, every asset stored in this buried vault. At the bottom of the final page was a total carefully calculated and underlined 3 times. Total asset value, adjusted for gold standard exchange rates as of September 1987, $275,643,822. Marcus's legs gave out. He sat down hard on the concrete floor, the clipboard falling from his hands. $275 million, buried in the desert, forgotten by the government that had hidden it here, lost in the bureaucratic shuffle when the Cold War ended and places like this became irrelevant. And his father had known, had been part of it, had helped seal this place and walk away, carrying the secret to his grave. Marcus didn't know how long he sat there, shock and disbelief and 1,000 other emotions washing over him. Outside, the storm raged, thunder rolling across the desert like artillery fire. But down here, in the earth, surrounded by enough money to change everything, there was only silence and the question that would define everything that came next. What do you do when you stumble into a fortune that doesn't belong to you, but doesn't belong to anyone else either? Marcus looked around the vault, his flashlight beam catching on containers and certificates and the weight of impossible choices. He was a homeless veteran, broken and forgotten, sleeping in the dirt, eating from dumpsters, invisible to the world that once pinned medals on his chest. And now he sat in the middle of $275 million. He could take it, some of it, enough to rebuild his life. No one knew this place existed. The combination had died with his father. The facility had been written off and forgotten. He could walk out of here with a backpack full of cash and disappear, start over somewhere new, become someone else. But even as the thought formed, Marcus knew he wouldn't, couldn't. Because despite everything he'd lost, despite the years of pain and loneliness and defeat, he was still a soldier. And soldiers didn't steal from their country, even when their country had forgotten them. He pulled himself to his feet and looked around the vault one more time. Somewhere in his chest, something that had been dead for years flickered back to life. Not hope exactly, but something close. Purpose, maybe, or just the recognition that his story wasn't over yet, that the man he used to be wasn't completely gone. Marcus Webb, homeless veteran, limped out of the vault and back up into the main facility. The storm was still raging outside, but down here, in the earth, he had time to think, to plan, to figure out what came next. Because finding $275 million was one thing. Deciding what to do with it, that was something else entirely. And for the first time in years, Marcus had a mission again. Marcus didn't sleep that night, not really. He lay on the floor of the old command center, wrapped in his emergency blanket, staring at the ceiling where ancient fluorescent fixtures cast their faint, ghostly glow. His mind wouldn't stop racing, wouldn't stop calculating, wouldn't stop asking questions that had no easy answers. $275 million. The number felt abstract, impossible, like something from a movie or a dream. He'd seen poverty up close for years now, knew the exact price of survival. A decent meal was $7. A week in a motel room was $200. A month's rent in the cheapest apartment was maybe $600. The disability check that barely covered anything was $1,138 a month. And here he sat on top of wealth that could change thousands of lives, tens of thousands maybe. The math made his head spin. As dawn broke somewhere above ground, Marcus forced himself to move. His leg had stiffened overnight, the cold and damp settling into his joints like concrete. He worked through the pain, pushing himself up, stretching, moving through the facility with purpose now instead of shock. He needed to understand this place completely, needed to know every room, every document, every piece of the puzzle before he could decide anything. That was how his father had taught him to approach problems. Gather all the intelligence first, then make your plan. The operations manual became his Bible over the next hours. He read every page, sometimes twice, learning the facility's history, its purpose, the procedures that governed it. Site 7 Delta had been established in 1963 during the height of Cold War paranoia, one of 17 such facilities hidden across the American Southwest. They were designed to survive nuclear war, to preserve the financial infrastructure needed to rebuild civilization from ashes. But as the Cold War thawed and the Soviet Union collapsed, these sites became obsolete, expensive relics of a paranoid age. According to the manual, Site 7 Delta had been officially decommissioned in 1989, its assets supposed to be transferred back to Federal Reserve custody. Except that clearly hadn't happened. Marcus found more documentation in a filing cabinet in one of the offices. Decommissioning orders, transfer requests, bureaucratic forms stamped and signed and filed away. But there were gaps in the paperwork, dates that didn't line up, signatures that looked rushed or forged. It painted a picture of a system so bloated and disorganized that an entire facility, an entire fortune, could simply fall through the cracks. His father's name appeared throughout the later documents. Captain James Webb had been assigned as senior custodial engineer in 1984, responsible for maintaining Site 7 Delta's systems until final decommissioning. The last entry in his handwriting was dated March 19, 1989. Final inspection complete, all systems secured, facility sealed per decommissioning protocol 77 Bravo. His father had locked this place up and walked away, following orders, trusting that someone higher up the chain would handle the rest. And then the paperwork had gotten lost. The institutional knowledge had retired or died, and Site 7 Delta had simply ceased to exist in any official capacity. Marcus sat back in the ancient desk chair and let himself think about his father for the first time in years. James Webb had been a hard man to know, quiet and disciplined, the kind of father who showed love through action rather than words. He'd taught Marcus how to fix engines, how to read maps, how to shoot straight and think strategically. But they'd never talked about feelings, never discussed the weight of duty or the cost of service. Marcus wondered if his father had struggled with this secret, if he'd lain awake at night thinking about the fortune buried in the desert, wondering if he'd done the right thing by walking away. Or maybe he'd simply followed orders and moved on, trusting the system to be smarter than any one man. The memories came flooding back now, unstoppable. Marcus closed his eyes and let himself remember who he'd been before everything fell apart. He'd joined the army at 18, following his father's footsteps, seeking the structure and purpose that civilian life seemed to lack. The military had fit him like a glove. He was good at it, good at the discipline, the clarity of mission, the brotherhood. He'd excelled in engineering school, shown natural talent for understanding complex systems, mechanical and otherwise. By 25, he'd made captain, married Sarah Jenkins, a nurse he'd met at Fort Benning, and felt like his life was unfolding exactly as it should. Emma had been born a year later, small and perfect, with Sarah's green eyes and his own stubborn chin. Holding his daughter for the first time, Marcus had felt something shift in his chest, a love so fierce it was almost frightening. His first 2 deployments had been hard but manageable. Sarah had been strong, resilient, keeping their home together while he served in Iraq and then Kuwait. Emma had been too young to understand, accepting his absences with the adaptability of childhood. He'd come home both times tired but intact, grateful, ready to be a husband and father again. The third deployment had been different from the start. Afghanistan, 2009, Helmand Province, the height of the surge. Marcus's unit had been tasked with route clearance, finding and neutralizing IEDs before they could kill American and Allied forces. It was dangerous work, statistics said. 1 in 10 would come home with serious injuries. 1 in 50 wouldn't come home at all. Marcus had been confident, maybe too confident. He'd trained for this, studied every technique, every innovation. He'd been good at his job, one of the best. His team looked up to him, trusted him, followed his lead without question. He remembered their names, their faces, every detail. Sergeant Danny Rodriguez, 28, newlywed, wanted to open a gym when he got home. Specialist Kevin Tran, 22, college dropout, brilliant with electronics, planning to finish his degree. Private First Class James Hutchins, 19, kid from Montana who'd never seen the ocean and talked constantly about visiting California when his tour ended. They'd been on patrol, routine, checking a road that local intelligence said was clear. Marcus had been walking point, using the metal detector, moving slowly and carefully. And then Rodriguez had stepped wrong, or the intel had been bad, or God had just stopped paying attention for 1 critical second. The explosion had been massive, powerful enough to throw Marcus 20 feet. He'd landed hard, his legs shattered, his ears ringing, his vision blurred. But he'd been alive, conscious enough to turn his head and see what was left of his team. Rodriguez had taken the full force of the blast. There hadn't been enough left to identify without DNA. Tran had been thrown into a wall, neck broken, dead before he hit the ground. Hutchins had survived the initial explosion but bled out before the medevac arrived, his hand in Marcus's, his voice getting quieter and quieter until it stopped altogether. Marcus had held that dying kid's hand and made promises he knew he couldn't keep, told him he'd be fine, help was coming, just hold on. And when Hutchins's eyes had gone empty and his grip had gone slack, something inside Marcus had broken that no surgery could ever fix. The physical recovery had been brutal, 7 operations over 18 months, learning to walk again, learning to live with chronic pain. But the psychological recovery had been impossible. Marcus came home to Sarah and Emma, but the man who walked through that door wasn't the man who'd left. The nightmares were the worst. Reliving the explosion every night, sometimes multiple times, waking up screaming, drenched in sweat, convinced he could still smell burning flesh and copper blood. Sarah had tried to help, tried to understand, but how could she? How could anyone who hadn't been there? The rage had come next, sudden and overwhelming, triggered by nothing or everything. A car backfiring, a door slamming, Emma dropping a plate. Marcus would find himself shaking, furious, unable to explain why or make it stop. He'd punched holes in walls, broken furniture, scared his own daughter until she started flinching when he entered a room. The drinking had started as self-medication, a way to quiet the noise in his head, to blur the memories enough to function. A beer with dinner became 3, became 6, became a bottle of whiskey that he'd hide in the garage and sip from throughout the day. Sarah had pleaded with him to get help, to talk to someone, to try. He'd gone to a few VA appointments, sat through group therapy sessions where other broken men told their stories. But talking about it didn't make it better, it just made it real in a new way. The jobs had fallen apart one by one. He'd take a position, show up on time for a few weeks, then miss a day because he couldn't get out of bed, then miss another because he'd been drinking. Employers were understanding at first, thanking him for his service, giving him chances. But patience had limits, and Marcus exceeded all of them. Sarah had filed for divorce when Emma was 9. Marcus had been living in the garage by then, too unstable to be in the house, too proud to leave entirely. The custody hearing had been devastating, listening to his own wife testify that he was a danger to their daughter, that supervised visits were necessary, that Emma had started having nightmares about Daddy's yelling. Marcus hadn't fought it. How could he? Everything Sarah said was true. He was broken, dangerous, unreliable. Emma deserved better than a father who reeked of whiskey and woke up screaming. The last time he'd seen his daughter, she'd been 10 years old, sitting across from him in a supervised visitation room at the community center, a social worker watching from the corner. Emma had drawn him a picture, a house with a family in front of it, 2 adults and a child, all holding hands. "This is when you're better," she'd said, her voice so small, so hopeful. "When you stop being sad and come home." Marcus had taken the picture with shaking hands and promised her he would get better, that he'd come back. But even as he said it, he'd known he was lying. There was no getting better, no coming back. There was only the long, slow slide into nothing. He'd skipped the next visit and the next, and eventually the calls from the social worker had stopped coming. Sarah had moved on, he'd heard, married a decent man who treated Emma well, who showed up for school plays and soccer games and all the normal dad things Marcus couldn't do anymore. That should have made him happy, knowing his daughter had stability, but mostly it just made him feel erased. The descent into homelessness had been gradual, almost gentle in its inevitability. First the apartment went, then the storage unit where he'd kept the last remnants of his old life, then everything except what fit in a backpack. He'd drifted west, following the weather, ending up in Redstone because it was warm and small and no one asked questions. Marcus opened his eyes, back in the present, back in the Cold War bunker that had somehow become his refuge. Tears tracked down his face, cutting paths through dust and dirt. He wiped them away roughly, angry at himself for the weakness. But maybe crying wasn't weakness. Maybe it was just being human, something he'd forgotten how to do. He stood and walked back down to the vault, needing to see it again, needing to confirm it was real and not some hallucination born from hunger and desperation. The massive door stood open like a mouth, the containers of currency and bonds and certificates stacked in their precise rows. Marcus approached the nearest stack and pulled out another container, this one filled with bonds dated 1978. As he rifled through them, something else caught his eye, a smaller box tucked behind the larger containers, easy to miss in the overwhelming plenty. He pulled it out carefully. It was a personal lockbox, the kind soldiers used for important documents, and it bore a stenciled name on the side, Captain J. Webb. Marcus's hands trembled as he opened it. Inside were letters, dozens of them, still in their envelopes, addressed to his father at various military installations. He recognized his mother's handwriting on some, his own childish scrawl on others, letters he'd written to his dad during deployments. But there were other documents too, a journal, leather-bound and worn, filled with his father's precise handwriting. Marcus sat down right there on the vault floor and began to read. The entries spanned years, starting in 1984 when James had been assigned to Site 7 Delta. The early entries were routine, maintenance logs, system checks, the mundane details of keeping an underground facility operational. But as Marcus read deeper, the tone changed. March 12, 1987. Received word today that 3 more sites have been decommissioned and emptied. We're down to 5 active repositories. Washington says budget cuts, but I think they're just forgetting why we built these places, forgetting how close we came to needing them. September 3, 1987. Calculated the total asset value today, $275 million, adjusted for current exchange rates. That's enough to rebuild a city, feed a state, restart an economy, and it's sitting here in the dark while people above ground struggle. Sometimes I wonder if we're protecting this money or just hiding it. January 26, 1988. Got a letter from Marcus today. He's excelling in ROTC, top of his class. Says he wants to serve like his old man, make me proud. Already proud, son, prouder than you know. Sometimes I think about what kind of world you'll inherit, whether all this preparation and paranoia will matter or whether we're just old men planning for yesterday's war. July 4th, 1989. Decommissioning orders came through today. Official this time. I'm supposed to catalog everything, transfer it to federal custody, seal the site. But the paperwork is a mess. 3 different agencies claiming jurisdiction, none of them talking to each other. I've requested clarification 4 times. No response. It's like Washington has forgotten we exist. March 19th, 1989. Made the decision today, sealed the facility per protocol, filed all the required reports. If the system works like it's supposed to, they'll collect everything within 90 days. If not, well, maybe that tells us something about the system. I followed my orders, did my duty. The rest is above my pay grade. God help whoever finds this place if I'm wrong. Marcus read the last entry 3 times, his father's words echoing in his head. James Webb had known, had understood the precarious position he was leaving this place in, had bet on the system working properly and lost. But he'd followed his orders, done what he was told, trusted in the chain of command. And now, 36 years later, his son sat in the same vault, faced with the same impossible choice. Marcus closed the journal and held it against his chest, feeling closer to his father than he had in decades. James hadn't been perfect, hadn't been emotionally available, but he'd been honest, dutiful, a man who did what he thought was right even when it was hard. What happens next will turn this night upside down, reveal a truth nobody expected, and remind us why sometimes the quietest voices carry the most power. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. Marcus spent the rest of the day exploring every inch of the facility, documenting everything with a cheap digital camera he'd found in one of the storage rooms, miraculously still functional. He photographed the vault, the containers, the documents, his father's journal, everything. If he was going to do something with this discovery, he needed evidence, proof that would stand up to scrutiny. In one of the dormitory rooms, he found a footlocker that made his breath catch. His father's name was painted on the side. Inside were personal effects, a photo album, some books, a portable radio, the small comforts of a man stationed far from home. The photo album was a revelation, pictures of Marcus as a child, his mother, family gatherings, but also pictures of this facility, his father standing proudly in front of the vault, posing with other engineers documenting the work. One photo in particular struck Marcus, his father standing next to another officer, both of them in dress uniforms, the caption written in his mother's handwriting. Jim and Colonel Morrison, Site 7 Delta Dedication, July 1963. Colonel Morrison, Marcus knew that name. He'd been a legend in the Army Corps of Engineers, had gone on to become a general, had died just a few years ago. Marcus stared at the photo, thinking, if Colonel Morrison had been here at the beginning, there might be other people who knew about this place, veterans who'd served here, families who'd heard stories. This wasn't just his secret to bear, it was a piece of military history, a reminder of an era when America had been so afraid of annihilation that it buried fortune in the desert. He continued his documentation methodically, photographing every document, every serial number on every bond and certificate, creating a record that would prove this wasn't a fantasy or a scam. The work was exhausting, and his leg throbbed constantly, but it felt good to have purpose again, to be using his mind and his training for something that mattered. As night fell again above ground, Marcus sat in the command center eating another can of ancient rations, something that might have once been beef stew, but now was just protein and calories. His mind was clearer than it had been in years, the shock of the discovery giving way to calculation, to planning. He couldn't keep this secret. That much was obvious. This money belonged to someone, if not the government that had forgotten it, then maybe to the people that government was supposed to serve. But he also couldn't just call the police or walk into a federal building with wild stories of buried treasure. They'd think he was crazy, dangerous, another unstable veteran making trouble. He needed a strategy, a plan that would protect him while ensuring the truth came out. And he needed help, the kind of help he'd spent years avoiding, the kind that required trust and vulnerability, and all the things his pride and shame had made impossible. Marcus thought about Sarah, his ex-wife. She'd remarried, moved on, built a life that didn't include him, but she'd also known him when he was whole, had believed in him once. Could he call her after all these years? Did he have the right to drag her back into his chaos? And Emma. God, Emma was 16 now, practically an adult. Had she forgiven him for disappearing? Did she even remember him beyond vague impressions of a father who'd failed her? The thought of facing his daughter, of seeing the person she'd become without him, filled Marcus with equal parts longing and terror. But something his father had written in the journal kept echoing in his mind. The rest is above my pay grade. James Webb had followed orders, trusted the system, done his duty, and the system had failed. Maybe it was time for someone to step up, to make the hard choice, to do what was right instead of what was easy or safe. Marcus pulled out his ancient cell phone, a prepaid flip phone he kept charged at the library. He had maybe $3 of credit left, enough for one short call. He'd memorized Sarah's number years ago, back when he'd still thought about calling, still harbored fantasies of reconciliation. His finger hovered over the buttons. What would he even say? Hi, it's Marcus. I know I'm basically dead to you, but I found $275 million in a bunker, and I need help. That sounded insane even in his own head. But maybe that was the point. Maybe the truth was so big, so impossible, that it required faith, required someone to believe in him one more time, despite every reason not to. Marcus took a deep breath and dialed the number. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. He was about to hang up when someone answered. Hello? Sarah's voice, older but unmistakable. The voice that had once promised to love him in sickness and health. The voice he'd disappointed so thoroughly that even its memory carried weight. Sarah, Marcus said, his own voice rough from disuse and emotion. It's Marcus. Silence, long and heavy. Marcus? Disbelief, maybe anger, he couldn't tell. After 6 years, you're calling me now? I know, he said. I know I have no right. I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, but I need to tell you something important. Are you drunk? Her voice was sharp, protective, the voice of someone who'd been hurt too many times. No, he said. I'm sober. I'm clear, and I know this is going to sound crazy, but I need you to listen. Please. Another pause, then quietly, I'm listening. Marcus closed his eyes and began to talk, the words tumbling out in a rush, the discovery, the facility, his father's journal, the impossible fortune sitting in the dark beneath the desert. He talked for 10 minutes straight, burning through his phone credit, not caring, just needing her to hear, to understand. When he finished, the silence stretched so long he thought she'd hung up. Then Sarah said, Where are you? Redstone, Arizona, Marcus replied. Living on the streets, found this place during a storm. Jesus, Marcus, her voice broke slightly. You're homeless? Yeah, he said simply. Have been for a while, but Sarah, this isn't about me. This money, if it's real, if we can prove it's real, it could help people, veterans, families, all the people the system forgot about, just like it forgot about this place. If it's real, Sarah repeated. Marcus, do you understand how this sounds? I do, he said. But I have proof, photographs, documents, my father's journal. I'm not hallucinating. I'm not making this up. I need someone to believe me. Just for a minute. Long enough to help me figure out what to do next. The phone beeped, warning him his credit was almost gone. My phone's about to die, Marcus said quickly. I'll call you back. I'll find a way to call you back. But Sarah, please, think about it. Think about whether the man you married before everything went wrong, whether that man would lie about something like this.
Marcus, wait,
Sarah started, but the phone cut off, the credit exhausted, the connection severed. Marcus sat in the darkness, his hand still gripping the dead phone, not knowing if he'd just taken the first step toward redemption or simply added one more disappointment to a long list of failures. But he'd made the call, spoken the truth, set something in motion that couldn't be stopped. And for better or worse, he was committed now. Outside, somewhere above the buried facility, the desert night settled in with its infinite stars and ancient silence. But down below, in the Cold War vault where America had hidden its fears and its fortune, Marcus Webb sat surrounded by impossible wealth and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope, fragile as a candle flame, but burning nonetheless. He looked at the containers of currency, the bonds and certificates that represented decades of work and worry, and made himself a promise. This money would matter, would mean something, would help the people who needed it most. Not because he deserved a second chance, he probably didn't, but because his father had trusted the system to do right and the system had failed. Maybe it was time for one broken veteran to show them how it should have been done all along. Marcus stood slowly, his bad leg protesting, and walked through the vault one more time. He ran his fingers along the containers, feeling the weight of history and possibility. Somewhere in this room was the answer, the solution that would honor his father's memory, help his fellow veterans, and maybe, just maybe, prove to his daughter that her father was capable of one final act of courage. He just had to figure out what that act would be. Marcus woke to the sound of his own breathing, loud in the absolute silence of the underground facility. He'd fallen asleep at the desk in the command center, his head pillowed on his arms, his father's journal open beneath him. His neck ached, his leg throbbed, and for a moment he couldn't remember where he was or why everything felt different. Then it all came rushing back. The vault, the money, the phone call to Sarah. He sat up slowly, wincing at the protests from his body. The faint emergency lights still glowed overhead, timeless and patient. He checked his watch, an old Timex he'd found at a thrift store, 7:43 in the morning. He'd been underground for nearly 2 full days. Marcus stood and stretched, working the stiffness from his joints. His stomach growled, reminding him that cold canned beans weren't really sustaining him. He'd need to surface soon, find real food, figure out his next move. But first, he had work to finish. He spent the morning going through more filing cabinets, pulling documents, reading histories he'd never known existed. Site 7. Delta wasn't just a vault, it had been a working facility, staffed by rotating crews of engineers, security personnel, and administrators. The personnel records told stories of regular people doing extraordinary duty, maintaining a secret that could never be acknowledged. One file caught his attention, a folder labeled Custodial Staff 1978 through 1990. Inside were service records for everyone who'd worked at the facility during its final years. Marcus flipped through slowly, reading names and ranks, seeing faces in old ID photos, young men and women who'd served their country in the shadows. And then he saw something that made his hands still. Not all the names were followed by routine discharge dates. Some had different notations. Sergeant William Bradford, deceased March 1984, heart attack. Specialist Linda Chen, deceased November 1986, cancer. Lieutenant Robert Hayes, deceased July 1991, suicide. Marcus counted them slowly. 37 names total, 12 marked deceased, all within 15 years of their service at Site 7 Delta ending. That was too many, statistically wrong, and the causes told a story. Heart attacks in relatively young men, cancers, suicides, the kind of deaths that plagued veterans who'd seen too much, carried too much, been forgotten too completely. He pulled another file, this one containing correspondence between the facility commander and Veterans Affairs. The letters were formal, bureaucratic, but between the lines Marcus could read desperation. Families asking about benefits, widows trying to understand why their husbands had died so young, children seeking explanations for fathers who'd come home from routine assignment and slowly deteriorated. And the VA's responses were uniform, polite refusals, classifications that couldn't be discussed, benefits that couldn't be confirmed because the service in question was officially classified. These people had sacrificed, had kept secrets, had done their duty, and in return they'd been erased. Marcus felt anger building in his chest, hot and righteous. This was the same system that had forgotten the money, the same bureaucratic machine that had lost track of a $275 million contingency fund. And along the way, it had lost track of the people who'd protected it, had let them die without acknowledgement, without the help they'd earned. He gathered the personnel files carefully, adding them to his growing collection of evidence. These weren't just documents anymore. They were proof of a broken promise, of a system that failed the very people it asked to sacrifice the most. By early afternoon, Marcus knew he couldn't put it off any longer. He needed food, needed to charge his phone, needed to surface and face the world above. He secured the facility as best he could, closing the vault door but not locking it, sealing the hatch but leaving it accessible. This wasn't his secret to guard alone anymore. He climbed the metal stairs and emerged into blazing Arizona sunshine that made him squint and stumble. The storm had passed completely, leaving the desert washed clean and impossibly bright. Marcus stood beside the half-buried hatch and looked around, getting his bearings. Red stone was visible in the distance, heat shimmering off the asphalt, looking exactly as it had before. But Marcus felt different, walking back toward town with purpose in his stride, despite the limp, despite the hunger, despite everything. He had a mission now, and missions required planning, required resources, required help. The public library was his first stop, a small building that smelled like old paper and industrial cleaner. The librarian, a woman named Margaret who'd always been kind to him, looked up in surprise. "Marcus," she said, "haven't seen you in a few days. You all right?" "Yes, ma'am," he replied. "Could I use the computer? Need to send some emails." She nodded and pointed him to the row of ancient desktops in the corner. Marcus settled in and began searching, looking for anyone who might remember Site 7 Delta, veterans organizations, journalists who covered military history, anyone who might listen to an impossible story from a homeless veteran. He found a name that resonated, Lieutenant Colonel retired Daniel Morrison, son of the Colonel Morrison, who'd been photographed with Marcus's father at the facility dedication. According to his LinkedIn profile, Daniel was now a veterans advocate in Phoenix, working with a non-profit that helped homeless vets find housing and health care. Marcus composed an email carefully, explaining who he was, mentioning his father and the photograph, hinting at a discovery that might matter to veterans everywhere. He didn't mention the money, not yet, but he tried to strike a tone that was serious without sounding crazy. He hit send and sat back, wondering if anyone would even read it, or if it would disappear into the digital void like so much else. His phone vibrated in his pocket, startling him. He pulled it out and saw a text from an unknown number. "This is Sarah. Bought you phone credit. Call me when you can. We need to talk." Marcus's heart hammered. She'd believed him, or at least believed enough to reach out, to help. He stepped outside into the harsh sunlight and dialed her number with shaking fingers. She answered on the first ring. "Marcus." "You bought me phone credit," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I did," Sarah replied. "I've been thinking about what you said, about the facility, the money, all of it. I want to believe you're not. I want to believe this is real." "It is," Marcus said. "I swear to you it is." A pause, then, "Emma's been asking about you." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. "What?" "She's 16 now," Sarah continued. "She's been asking questions, wants to know why you left, whether you're alive, if you ever think about her. I've been telling her you're sick, that you're not able to be in her life right now. But Marcus," She deserves better than half-truths. Marcus leaned against the library wall, his legs suddenly weak. What does she look like? Sarah's voice softened. She looks like you. Same stubborn chin, same way of frowning when she's thinking hard. She's smart, Marcus. On a roll, wants to join ROTC next year, wants to serve like her grandfather. No, Marcus said sharply. Not the military. Not with what happened to me. That's what I told her, Sarah said. But you know how teenagers are. The more I say no, the more determined she gets. She says she wants to understand what you went through, wants to honor your service. Marcus felt tears burning behind his eyes. I don't deserve that. I don't deserve her thinking about me at all. Maybe not, Sarah said, and her honesty stung. But she is thinking about you, and she's going to make decisions based on an absent father she's built into either a hero or a monster, neither of which is fair to her or to you. What do you want me to do? Marcus asked. I want you to prove this is real, Sarah said. The facility, the discovery, all of it. And if it is, if you're not having some kind of episode, then I want you to do something with it that matters, not for you, for everyone else. Show Emma that her father is capable of more than disappearing. Marcus straightened, wiping his eyes. I will. I promise you I will. I'm going to hold you to that, Sarah said. I'm sending you my address. If you need help, real help, you call me. But Marcus, if this turns out to be nothing, if you're chasing ghosts or making things up, we're done. You don't get to hurt her again. Understood, Marcus said. And Sarah, thank you for believing, even a little bit. She hung up without responding, but she'd heard him, and for now, that was enough. Marcus walked back toward the edge of town, his mind churning with plans and possibilities. He needed to document more, needed to build an airtight case that would withstand scrutiny. But he also needed to be smart about it, needed to protect himself and the discovery until he was ready to go public. He was so lost in thought that he didn't notice the truck following him until it was too late. Hey! A voice called out. You there, homeless guy? Marcus turned to see a beat-up Ford F-150 pulling up beside him, a man in his 50s leaning out the window. Marcus recognized him vaguely, a local contractor named Dale something, someone he'd seen around town but never spoken to. You're that vet, right? Dale asked. The one who sleeps by the old Shell station? Yeah, Marcus said carefully. Can I help you? Dale smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Funny thing, I've been noticing you disappearing every day, same direction, out toward the desert. Got me curious where a homeless guy goes so regular-like. Marcus felt his stomach drop. Just walking helps clear my head. Sure, Dale said, his smile widening. Except I followed you yesterday, watched you go straight to that old bunker out past the fence line. That place has been sealed up since I was a kid. Everyone knows about it. And now suddenly you're crawling in and out like you own it. I don't know what you're talking about, Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. Dale put the truck in park and stepped out, and Marcus saw he was bigger than he'd looked through the window, solid and mean in a way that came from years of physical work and not much conscience. Here's the thing, friend. I'm a curious guy, and I'm betting whatever's in that bunker is worth something. Otherwise, why would you keep going back? So here's my offer. You cut me in, show me what you found, and I keep quiet about it. Or I go to the sheriff, tell him there's some crazy vet breaking into government property. Marcus's military training kicked in, reading Dale's body language, calculating threat levels. This man wasn't bluffing. He'd followed through, would follow through again. But he also wasn't smart enough to understand what he'd stumbled onto. There's nothing in there, Marcus said, keeping his voice level. Just old equipment, some papers, nothing worth anything. Then you won't mind showing me, Dale pressed. Come on, let's take a drive out there right now. You show me this whole lot of nothing and I'll leave you alone. Marcus considered his options. He could refuse, could walk away, but Dale knew where the facility was now. The secret was already compromised. Or he could call Dale's bluff, Show him just enough to satisfy his curiosity without revealing the vault. Fine, Marcus said, but there's really nothing to see. They drove in tense silence, Dale's truck bouncing over the rough desert road. When they reached the facility, Dale parked and followed Marcus to the hatch. Marcus made a show of struggling with it, making it seem harder to access than it really was. "Give me a hand," Marcus said, and Dale stepped closer. In that moment, Marcus moved, not violently but with the precision of someone trained in hand-to-hand combat. He swept Dale's legs, dropping the bigger man onto his back, then planted a knee on his chest before Dale could react. "Listen to me very carefully," Marcus said, his voice cold and controlled. "I'm a disabled veteran, but I was a captain in the Army Corps of Engineers, explosives specialist, trained in about 15 ways to put you down without breaking a sweat. You followed the wrong man to the wrong place." Dale's eyes were wide, shocked. "What the hell?" "There's nothing in that bunker for you," Marcus continued. "And if you tell anyone about it, if you bring anyone out here, if you do anything except forget you ever saw this place, I will make your life very difficult. I have friends in the military, people who can make problems disappear. Do you understand?" It was a bluff, mostly, but Dale didn't know that. He nodded quickly, gasping. Yeah, I understand. I'll forget about it. Jesus, I was just curious." Marcus released him and stood back. "Go home, Dale, and thank whatever God you believe in that I'm trying to be a better man than I used to be." Dale scrambled to his feet and ran for his truck, spinning wheels in his hurry to leave. Marcus watched him disappear down the road, his heart pounding. He'd handled it without real violence, but he'd revealed something about himself he'd kept hidden for years. He wasn't as broken as people thought, wasn't as helpless, but the encounter had reminded him of something crucial. Time was running out. If Dale had noticed his pattern, others might too. And if word spread about the bunker, it wouldn't be long before real authorities came looking. Marcus descended into the facility one more time, moving with urgency now. He gathered all the documents he'd photographed, stuffed them into a waterproof bag he'd found in the storage room. He took his father's journal, the personnel files, the inventory lists, everything that would prove his story. The money itself he left untouched, hadn't taken a single bill, hadn't even been tempted beyond that first moment of shock. This wasn't his fortune to claim. It belonged to something bigger, to the veterans who'd died protecting it, to the families who'd been forgotten, to everyone the system had failed. As Marcus worked, his phone rang, an Arizona number he didn't recognize. He answered cautiously. "Hello? Mr. Webb, this is Daniel Morrison. You emailed me about my father and a classified facility?" Marcus's heart leapt. "Yes, sir. Yes, thank you for calling back. I know this sounds crazy, but—" "My father talked about Site 7 Delta," Daniel interrupted. "Not often, not in detail, but enough that I knew it existed. He said it was one of his greatest accomplishments and one of his deepest regrets. Said they'd built something important and then abandoned it." "It wasn't abandoned," Marcus said. "It was forgotten, and I found it, sir. I found everything." Daniel was quiet for a long moment. "Everything?" $275 million, Marcus said. "Plus personnel records, evidence of veterans who served there and died without proper benefits, documentation of the whole thing. My father was the last custodial engineer, Captain James Webb." "James Webb," Daniel repeated. "I remember that name. Good man, solid engineer. He worked with my father on the decommissioning protocols." "Protocols that failed," Marcus said. "The money never got transferred. The site never got properly closed. It just fell through bureaucratic cracks." "And you found it," Daniel said. "A homeless veteran stumbled onto the biggest government screw-up in decades." "Yes, sir," Marcus said. "And I don't know what to do about it. I'm one man with no credibility, no resources, no reason for anyone to believe me. But I have proof, photographs, documents, and I have a location." Daniel was silent for so long Marcus thought the connection had dropped. Then, "Don't do anything yet. Don't tell anyone else. Don't try to go public on your own. I know people, Mr. Webb. I know journalists who specialize in this kind of story, lawyers who handle government accountability cases. If this is real, if you really found what you say you found, we need to do this right." "How do I know I can trust you?" Marcus asked. "You don't," Daniel said honestly. "But I'm betting your father taught you to recognize honor when you see it, same as mine did. I'm not interested in the money, Mr. Webb. I'm interested in justice for the men who protected it and were forgotten, including you." Marcus felt something in his chest loosen, relief or hope, or just the weight of not carrying this alone anymore. "What do I do?" "Meet me tomorrow," Daniel said. "Phoenix, I'll text you an address. Bring everything you can carry, every piece of proof you have. And Mr. Webb, if this is real, if we can prove it, you just became the most important whistleblower in Veterans Affairs history." They talked for another 15 minutes, Daniel asking careful questions, Marcus providing detailed answers. By the time they hung up, Marcus felt something he hadn't felt in years, like he was part of a team again, like he had backup, like maybe he wasn't going to face this alone. He climbed out of the facility as sunset painted the desert in shades of gold and purple. Back in town, he bought a sandwich with the last few dollars in his pocket, ate it slowly while watching the sky darken. Tomorrow, everything would change. For better or worse, there was no going back now. That night, he slept in his usual spot behind the abandoned Shell station. But his dreams were different. Instead of explosions and screaming and the faces of dead men, he dreamed of his father, young and strong, standing in front of Site 7 Delta with pride in his eyes. In the dream, James Webb turned and saw his son, smiled, and said, "I knew you'd find it. I knew you'd know what to do." Marcus woke with tears on his face and purpose in his heart. He gathered his meager belongings, tucked the waterproof bag of documents into his backpack, and began walking toward the highway. Phoenix was 2 hours by car, probably 6 or 7 hours on foot if he could catch rides. He stuck out his thumb at the edge of town, and against all odds, the third car stopped. An elderly woman who said she was heading to Mesa. Would that help? Marcus climbed in gratefully and watched Redstone disappear in the side mirror. The woman tried to make conversation, asking where he was from, what he did, the usual questions strangers asked. Marcus gave vague answers, his mind elsewhere, until she said, "You have the look of someone carrying something heavy." He glanced at her, this grandmother with kind eyes and weathered hands. "Yes, ma'am, I suppose I do." "Well," she said, eyes on the road, "sometimes the heaviest things we carry are the ones we're afraid to put down, even when we know we should." Marcus thought about that as the desert rolled past, thought about the weight he'd been carrying for years, guilt and shame and failure, but he also thought about the new weight, the responsibility of truth, of justice, of doing right by people who couldn't do it themselves. Maybe she was right. Maybe he'd been afraid to put down his burden of worthlessness because it was familiar, comfortable in its pain. But this new weight, this mission, it was different. It was a burden worth carrying. When she dropped him off at a truck stop in Mesa, Marcus thanked her and walked toward the address Daniel had texted him. It was in a professional building, offices for non-profits and small law firms. He found the suite number and knocked. Daniel Morrison opened the door himself, a man in his early 60s with his father's sharp eyes and a firm handshake. "Mr. Webb," he said, "come in." The office was small but organized, walls covered with photos of veterans, certificates of appreciation, evidence of a life dedicated to helping those who'd served. Daniel offered coffee, which Marcus accepted gratefully, then sat behind his desk with the careful posture of someone used to command. "Show me," Daniel said simply. Marcus pulled out the waterproof bag and began laying out documents, photographs, his father's journal, the personnel files. He talked as he worked, explaining the discovery, the facility, the money, the forgotten veterans. Daniel listened without interrupting, occasionally picking up a document to study it closely. When Marcus finished, Daniel sat back in his chair and exhaled slowly. "This is real," he said, not a question but a statement of awe. "You actually found it." "Yes, sir," Marcus said. "And now I need help figuring out what to do with it, how to make sure it matters." Daniel nodded slowly. "I know exactly what we do with it. We tell the truth, the whole truth, and we make damn sure that money goes where it should have gone 40 years ago. To veterans, to their families, to the people who've been waiting for someone to give a damn." Marcus felt something in his chest crack open, relief and gratitude, and the overwhelming sensation of not being alone anymore. "How do we start?" "We start," Daniel said, "by calling some people I trust, a journalist who won't sensationalize this, a lawyer who specializes in government accountability, maybe a congressman or two who actually care about veterans. We build a team, we verify everything, and then we go public in a way that's so airtight, so undeniable, they can't bury it again." "And me?" Marcus asked. "What happens to me?" Daniel looked at him steadily. "That depends on you, Mr. Webb. You can fade into the background, let others take the credit, go back to your life. Or you can stand up, tell your story, show the world that homeless veterans are still capable of honor and duty and sacrifice. Your choice." Marcus thought about Emma, about his daughter wanting to understand him, wanting to serve like he had. Maybe this was his chance to show her something worth emulating, not the broken man who'd abandoned her, but the man who'd found something precious and chose to protect it for others. "I'll stand up," Marcus said quietly. "I'll tell my story." Daniel smiled, the first real warmth Marcus had seen from him. "Then let's get to work, Captain Webb. We've got a lot to do, and not much time to do it." They worked through the night, making calls, sending encrypted emails, building a coalition of truth-tellers and advocates. And with each phone call, each new person who joined their cause, Marcus felt the weight on his shoulders shift from crushing burden to shared mission. He was a soldier again, part of a unit, fighting for something that mattered, and this time he wasn't going to let his brothers down. The journalist Daniel called was a woman named Rachel Martinez, an investigative reporter for the Arizona Republic who'd made her career exposing government waste and bureaucratic failure. She arrived at Daniel's office at 6 in the morning, her recording equipment already set up before the coffee finished brewing. "Show me everything," she said, not bothering with pleasantries. Marcus liked her immediately. He walked her through the discovery again, this time with Daniel adding context about Cold War protocols, about how facilities like Site 7 Delta were supposed to work. Rachel recorded everything, took notes in shorthand, asked pointed questions that revealed a sharp mind and healthy skepticism. "You haven't taken any of the money," she said, studying Marcus carefully. "Not a single bill." "No, ma'am," Marcus replied. "Wouldn't be right." "Most people would have at least taken enough to get off the streets," she pressed. "You're telling me you found $275 million and didn't pocket anything for yourself." Marcus met her eyes steadily. "I'm telling you I found money that belonged to veterans who died protecting it, to families who were promised benefits they never received, to a system that failed everyone it was supposed to protect. That's not my money to take." Rachel studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay, I believe you. Which means we need to move fast. If word gets out before we control the narrative, this becomes a circus. Bureaucrats will claim jurisdiction, treasure hunters will crawl out of the woodwork, and the actual story, the important story, will get buried." "What do you need?" Daniel asked. "Access to the facility," Rachel said. "Video documentation, everything. I want to see this vault with my own eyes, film it, verify the inventory, and I want interviews with both of you, on camera, telling this story from start to finish." "When?" Marcus asked. "Today," Rachel said. "We go today, we film everything today, and I publish tomorrow, before anyone can stop us." They left Phoenix in Rachel's Jeep at 7:30, Daniel riding shotgun, Marcus in the back with equipment cases and camera gear. The drive back to Redstone felt surreal, like Marcus was watching his life from outside his body. 48 hours ago, he'd been invisible, a ghost nobody noticed. Now he was leading a journalist and a retired officer to reveal the biggest government screw-up in decades. They reached the facility by mid-morning, the desert already shimmering with heat. Rachel grabbed her camera and followed Marcus to the hatch, filming as he opened it, capturing his descent into the earth. Down in the command center, she panned slowly across the ancient equipment, the maps, the evidence of a facility frozen in time. "This is incredible," she breathed. "It's like walking into history." Marcus led them deeper, through the corridors, past the dormitories and storage rooms, down to the vault. When he opened the massive door and revealed the rows of currency containers, Rachel went absolutely still. "Holy God," she whispered. Then, remembering herself, "Can you get that on camera?" Her cameraman, a quiet man named Steve, who'd barely spoken the whole drive, moved closer, his lens capturing everything. The containers, the certificates, the bonds, the sheer overwhelming quantity of wealth hidden in the earth. Rachel interviewed Marcus on camera, standing in front of the vault. She asked about the discovery, about his father, about his decision not to take the money. Marcus spoke carefully, honestly, trying to explain something he barely understood himself. "I've been homeless for 3 years," he said, looking directly at the camera. "I've been hungry, cold, forgotten. When I found this money, my first thought was that it could change my life. But then I found the personnel files, read about the veterans who'd protected this place and died without proper recognition. I realized this money wasn't about me. It was about all of us, everyone the system forgot." They filmed for hours, documenting every corner of the facility, interviewing Daniel about Cold War protocols, capturing the evidence that would make the story undeniable. By the time they emerged back into sunlight, Marcus felt drained but purposeful. "This publishes tomorrow," Rachel said, checking her footage. "Front page, full spread, and I'm pitching it to the national networks tonight. Mr. Webb, by this time tomorrow, everyone in America is going to know your name." The thought terrified him. "What if they don't believe it? What if they think I'm crazy or lying?" "They'll believe it," Rachel said firmly, "because I'll make them see what I saw. A man who found fortune and chose honor instead." Back in Phoenix, Daniel set Marcus up in a cheap motel room. "Get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow is going to be intense, and you need to be ready." But Marcus couldn't sleep. He lay on the thin mattress, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything that would change once the story broke. He thought about Sarah and Emma, about whether his daughter would see the news, whether she'd be proud or embarrassed or indifferent. His phone buzzed, a text from Sarah. "Daniel Morrison called me, told me everything. I don't know what to say except I'm sorry I doubted you." Marcus stared at the message, then typed back slowly, "You had every reason to doubt. But Sarah, if this works, if we can make this matter, maybe Emma won't be ashamed of her father anymore." Her response came quickly. "She was never ashamed. She was hurt. There's a difference. Do you want to see her? After this is over, after the dust settles, do you want to try?" Marcus's hands shook as he typed, "More than anything." "Then make this count," Sarah wrote. "Show her what redemption looks like." The article hit the Arizona Republic's website at 5 in the morning. Marcus was already awake, had been all night, when Daniel called. "It's live," he said. "Rachel did a beautiful job. You need to see this." Marcus pulled up the article on his phone, and there it was. Front page, headline in bold, "Homeless veteran discovers $275 million in forgotten Cold War bunker." The story was everything Rachel had promised. Detailed, verified, impossible to dismiss as conspiracy or fantasy. She'd included photos of the facility, the vault, the containers of currency. She'd interviewed Daniel, quoted from his father's service records, connected the historical dots. And she'd centered Marcus's story, the veteran who'd found treasure and reported it instead of taking it. Within an hour, the story was everywhere. National news networks picked it up. Social media exploded. Marcus's phone, which had been silent for years, suddenly wouldn't stop buzzing with calls from reporters, producers, random people who somehow got his number. Daniel arrived at the motel at 8 with breakfast and a plan. "We've got interview requests from CNN, Fox, MSNBC, all the networks. The Arizona Attorney General's office wants to meet with us. 3 different senators have released statements, and there are already protesters outside the federal building in Phoenix demanding the money go to veterans' causes." "Protesters?" Marcus asked, stunned. "You struck a nerve," Daniel said. "People are angry that this money was forgotten, that veterans died without proper benefits, that the system failed so completely. You've become a symbol, Marcus, whether you wanted to or not." They spent the day in Daniel's office, fielding calls, coordinating interviews, building strategy. Rachel had been right to move fast. Now that the story was public, everyone wanted a piece of it. But Daniel was careful, selective, making sure Marcus only spoke to journalists who would tell the story right. By evening, federal agents arrived. Treasury Department investigators who needed to verify the facility, secure the assets, begin the bureaucratic process of accounting for money that officially didn't exist. Marcus led them to the site, answered their questions, watched as they documented everything he'd already documented. The lead investigator, a stern woman named Patricia Chen, pulled Marcus aside as her team worked. "You understand you're entitled to a finder's fee," she said. 10% is standard for recovered government assets. That's over $27 million. Marcus felt dizzy. "I don't want it." "You should take it," she said. "You could have stolen this money, could have disappeared. Instead, you did the right thing. That deserves compensation." "Give it to veterans," Marcus said. "Set up a fund, help homeless vets, provide mental health services, something that actually matters. I don't need $27 million. I just need to know this meant something." Patricia studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I'll make sure your wishes are noted in the report." The interviews started that night. Marcus sat across from Anderson Cooper, told his story to cameras that would broadcast it to millions. He sat with Rachel Maddow, with Sean Hannity, with journalists from every corner of the political spectrum. And every time he said the same thing. This wasn't about him. It was about the veterans who'd been forgotten, the families who'd been denied, the system that needed fixing. By the end of the week, Marcus was exhausted, overwhelmed, struggling to process how quickly his life had transformed. He'd gone from invisible to unavoidable, from nobody to somebody everyone wanted to talk to. But through it all, one thing remained constant. He hadn't seen Emma yet, hadn't figured out how to face his daughter after everything. That changed on a Saturday morning. Daniel called at 7. "Sarah's here. She brought Emma. They're downstairs." Marcus's heart stopped. "What? Now? I'm not ready. I don't—" "You'll never be ready," Daniel said gently. "But they're here, and they want to see you." Marcus dressed in the nicest clothes he had, which wasn't saying much, a donated button-down shirt and jeans that almost fit. His hands shook as he combed his hair, as he tried to look like someone worth knowing instead of the wreck he'd been. He walked downstairs to the lobby and stopped. Sarah stood near the entrance, older but still beautiful, her hair shorter than he remembered. And beside her was Emma, 16 years old, nearly his height, with his stubborn jaw and Sarah's green eyes. She wore jeans and a vintage army jacket, dog tags hanging around her neck that Marcus recognized as his grandfather's. She was beautiful and terrifying and everything he'd missed. "Hi," he said, his voice breaking on the single syllable. Emma stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she said, "You found a bunker full of money and didn't take any of it. Mom says that's the most dad thing you've ever done." Marcus laughed, a wet sound that might have been half sob. I'm trying to be better, trying to be someone worth knowing. I've always wanted to know you, Emma said, and her voice cracked too. I just didn't know how to find you, didn't know if you wanted to be found. Always, Marcus said. Every single day, I wanted to come back. I just didn't think I deserved to. Emma crossed the space between them in 3 steps and hugged him, fierce and desperate, her face pressed against his chest. Marcus wrapped his arms around his daughter and felt years of pain crack open, releasing something he hadn't known he was holding. I'm so sorry, he whispered into her hair. I'm so sorry I left, that I wasn't strong enough to stay, that I made you grow up without a father. You're here now, Emma said, pulling back to look at him. That's what matters. You're here now, and you did something incredible, something that's going to help people. Sarah approached slowly, her eyes wet. She's right, Marcus. What you did, what you're still doing, it matters. You could have taken that money and disappeared. Instead, you chose something harder, something honorable. I had good teachers, Marcus said, looking at Sarah. You taught me what real strength looks like. Raising Emma alone, working 2 jobs, never giving up. I'm just trying to be half as strong as you. They sat together in the lobby, the 3 of them, talking for hours. Emma asked about the facility, about the discovery, about his time in Afghanistan. Marcus answered honestly, not hiding the hard parts, the mistakes, the failures, but also sharing the moments of courage, the men he'd served with, the mission he'd believed in. Grandpa James would be proud, Emma said eventually. Mom showed me his journal entries, the ones you found. He believed in duty, in doing right, even when it was hard. You honored that. Marcus felt his father's presence like a weight lifted rather than carried. Maybe James had left that facility unsealed, not as a failure, but as a test, a challenge for whoever found it to prove that honor still mattered. The weeks that followed were a blur of activity. Congress held hearings, demanding answers about how a $275 million facility could be lost for 36 years. The Treasury Department launched a full audit. Veterans organizations rallied, demanding the money be used for its original purpose, helping veterans and their families. Marcus testified before Congress, sitting at a table with Daniel and Rachel, telling his story to senators and representatives who either looked inspired or embarrassed, depending on their level of complicity in the system's failures. He didn't pull punches, didn't soften the truth. I served my country for 12 years, he told the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee. I gave my health, my mental well-being, watched friends die, came home broken. The system that sent me to war couldn't figure out how to help me survive peace. And I'm not unique. There are thousands of veterans living on streets, dying from lack of health care, struggling with invisible wounds. That money buried in the desert, it was supposed to help us. It's time it finally did. The chairman, a senator from Montana who'd served in Vietnam, leaned forward. Captain Webb, you could have taken that money. $27 million as a finder's fee. You refused. Why? Marcus thought about it for a moment. Because it wasn't mine, sir. I didn't earn it. Rodriguez, Tran, Hutchins, they earned it. The 12 veterans whose names I found in those personnel files, who died without proper benefits, they earned it. My father, who kept that secret for years and trusted the system to do right, he earned it. I just found it. That doesn't make it mine. But you're homeless, another senator pressed. You're living in poverty. Surely you understand that money could have changed your life. It has changed my life, Marcus said, just not in the way you mean. 6 weeks ago, I was nobody, invisible, waiting to die. Now I'm sitting in Congress, telling the truth about how we fail our veterans. That's worth more than any amount of money. The hearing room erupted in applause, spectators rising to their feet. The chairman had to gavel for order 3 times before the room quieted. That moment went viral. Clips of Marcus's testimony played on every news channel, shared millions of times across social media. People who'd never thought about homeless veterans suddenly cared. Donations poured into veterans' organizations. Politicians who'd ignored the issue for decades suddenly couldn't stop talking about it. But for Marcus, the most important moment came later, in a quieter room. Daniel had arranged for him to meet with families of the veterans who died after serving at Site 7 Delta, the forgotten ones whose sacrifice had gone unacknowledged for decades. There were 8 families total, widows now in their 70s and 80s, children who were themselves grandparents. They gathered in a conference room at the Veterans Center, and Marcus walked in feeling the weight of what these people had lost. One woman, Helen Bradford, stood to greet him. Her husband William had died of a heart attack in 1984, at age 42, just months after his service at the facility ended. "They told me it was stress," she said, her voice still carrying grief after all these years. "They told me it wasn't service-connected, so I got nothing. No benefits, no pension, nothing. I raised 3 kids alone on a secretary's salary." Marcus took her hands in his. "I'm so sorry. Your husband's service mattered. What he protected mattered, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows it." Another man, Thomas Hayes, stepped forward. "My father was Lieutenant Robert Hayes. He killed himself in 91. I was 14. The VA said it wasn't service-connected because he'd been out for 2 years. But I knew. I saw what that place did to him, the secrets he carried, the way he'd wake up screaming about buried things that couldn't be talked about." "The fund will have a provision," Marcus said. "Survivor benefits for families of veterans who served at classified installations. It won't bring them back, but it will acknowledge their sacrifice." They spent 3 hours together, these families and Marcus, sharing stories, crying, healing in small ways. When it was over, Helen Bradford hugged him tightly. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for seeing us. For 40 years we've been invisible. Now, because of you, we matter again." The response was overwhelming. Public pressure mounted. Veterans staged demonstrations outside federal buildings in every state. Politicians who'd spent careers ignoring veteran issues suddenly couldn't talk about anything else. And slowly, reluctantly, the government began to move. A bill was introduced, the Site 7 Delta Veteran Restoration Act. It would establish a trust fund using the recovered assets, dedicated specifically to homeless veterans, mental health services, and family support programs. The finder's fee Marcus had refused would seed an emergency fund for vets in crisis. And the facility itself would be preserved as a museum, a reminder of both Cold War history and bureaucratic failure. The bill moved through Congress faster than anyone expected. Marcus watched from the gallery as it passed the House 412-8, then the Senate 96-3. The President signed it in a ceremony at the White House, and Marcus was invited to attend. He stood in the Rose Garden, wearing a suit Daniel had helped him pick out, watching the President speak about duty and honor and the debt America owed its veterans. Emma stood beside him, wearing her grandfather's dog tags, her hand in his. Sarah was there too, and Daniel and Rachel and a dozen other people who'd helped turn a discovery into a movement. "This is surreal," Marcus whispered to Emma as cameras flashed. "You earned it," she whispered back. "You found something precious and protected it. That's what heroes do." After the ceremony, the President pulled Marcus aside. "Captain Webb," he said, shaking Marcus's hand, "your service in Afghanistan was exemplary. Your service to your fellow veterans is extraordinary. On behalf of a grateful nation, thank you." Marcus didn't know what to say. 6 months ago, he'd been sleeping in the dirt, invisible to the world. Now the President was thanking him. Life moved in strange circles sometimes, but the real moment came later, when they returned to Arizona. Daniel had organized a gathering at the Veterans Center, a celebration for everyone who'd helped, who'd believed, who'd fought to make the discovery matter. The room was full of veterans, advocates, journalists, regular people who'd been moved by the story. Marcus stood at the front, Emma beside him, and looked out at faces that ranged from young to ancient, from every branch of service, from every background. These were his people, his tribe, the brothers and sisters who understood what service cost. "I don't have a speech prepared," he said. "I'm not good at speeches, but I want to say something. 6 months ago I was homeless, broken, convinced my life was over, that I'd failed at everything that mattered. I'd lost my family, my career, my sense of purpose. I was just waiting to die." The room was silent, attentive. "Then a storm drove me underground, and I found something I wasn't looking for. Not just money, but a second chance. A chance to prove that honor still matters, that duty doesn't end when the uniform comes off, that broken things can still be useful." He paused, looking at Emma. "My daughter asked me once why I left, why I couldn't be the father she needed. I told her I was broken, and I was. But I was wrong about what that meant. Being broken doesn't mean being worthless. Sometimes being broken is what lets the light in, what helps you see things you'd miss if you were still perfect and whole." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. That money in the desert, it was forgotten because the system was too big, too bloated, too focused on itself to remember why it existed. We can't let that happen to people. We can't let veterans or anyone who's sacrificed become footnotes in bureaucratic failures. We have to do better. We have to be better. He looked around the room. This fund, this museum, this whole thing, it's not just about money, it's about remembering, about seeing the invisible people, the ones sleeping in alleys and under bridges, and recognizing they have value, they have stories, they deserve dignity. The applause started slowly, then built, filling the room with sound that felt like validation, like purpose, like hope. Afterward, people came up to Marcus one by one, veterans who'd been homeless, who'd struggled, who saw themselves in his story. Family members of the men who'd died protecting Site 7 Delta, grateful that their sacrifice was finally acknowledged. Young people inspired to serve, to give back, to make a difference. One old man, easily 80, shook Marcus's hand with tears in his eyes. "I worked at Site 7 Delta in '67, he said. "No one ever believed me. No records, no proof. My own kids thought I was making it up. Thank you for proving I wasn't crazy." Marcus hugged him, this stranger who wasn't a stranger, this brother who'd kept the same secret for different reasons. As the evening wound down, Marcus stepped outside for air. The Arizona night was cool and clear, stars brilliant against the desert darkness. He thought about his father, about the choices James had made, about the legacy that had been waiting underground for someone to find it. He thought about Rodriguez, Tran, and Hutchins, the men who'd died on that road in Helmand Province. He'd spent years believing their deaths were his fault, that he'd failed them. But maybe the way to honor them wasn't through guilt and self-destruction. Maybe it was through this, through using his survival to help others survive too.
Dad?
Emma's voice came from the doorway. She stepped outside, wrapping her arms around herself against the chill.
You okay?
"Yeah," Marcus said, and meant it. "I really am." She moved beside him, looking up at the same stars. "Mom says you're getting an apartment next week, 3-bedroom, so I can visit." "If you want to," Marcus said. "I know I can't make up for the years I missed, can't fix what I broke. But if you'll let me, I'd like to try being your father again." Emma leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. "You never stopped being my father. You just forgot for a while. Now you're remembering, and that's enough." They stood together in silence, watching the night sky, both thinking about the strange roads that had led them here. Inside, Sarah joined them, standing on Marcus's other side. For a moment, the three of them were a family again, not the same as before, something different, something built on truth instead of pretense. "Emma wants to volunteer at the center," Sarah said, "helping with outreach, working with homeless vets." Marcus looked at his daughter. "You sure? It's hard work. You'll see people at their worst." I saw you at your worst, Emma said simply, and you came back from it. If you can do it, maybe I can help others do it too. Pride swelled in Marcus's chest, overwhelming and pure. This girl, this young woman he barely knew, had taken his brokenness and turned it into purpose. She'd inherited not his mistakes, but his resilience. 6 months later, the Site 7 Delta Memorial and Education Center opened to the public. The facility had been restored, cleaned, made safe, while preserving its historical integrity. Visitors could walk through the command center, see the vault, learn about Cold War history and the veterans who'd protected it. Marcus worked there as the director of veteran outreach, a paid position that came with healthcare, housing, and the kind of stability he'd thought he'd never have again. He led tours, spoke to school groups, connected homeless veterans with the resources from the Restoration Fund. Emma visited every weekend, often bringing friends, sometimes just coming to sit with her father in the command center where it all began. She'd decided not to join the military after all, at least not yet. Instead, she was studying social work, wanting to help veterans like her father find their way back from the darkness. The fund worked exactly as intended. In its first year, it provided housing for 2,800 veterans, mental health services for 5,000 more, emergency financial assistance for countless families. Marcus met many of them, heard their stories, saw himself reflected in their struggles and their victories. There was Carlos, a Marine who'd served in Iraq and ended up living in his car with his 2 kids. The fund got him into an apartment, connected him with job training, gave him a chance to rebuild. 6 months later, Carlos had a job as a mechanic and custody of his children. There was Jennifer, an army medic who'd come home with PTSD so severe she couldn't work, couldn't function, had attempted suicide twice. The fund paid for intensive therapy, helped her find a trauma specialist, supported her through 2 years of healing. Now she volunteered at the center, helping other female vets navigate the system. There was Malik, a Navy veteran who'd been homeless for 8 years, had given up on ever having a normal life again. The fund didn't just give him housing, it helped him reconnect with his estranged daughter, get treatment for his diabetes, find meaning again. He cried when he told Marcus his granddaughter had been born, and he'd been there, present, sober, whole. These stories became Marcus's purpose. Every veteran helped, every family reunited, every life saved. It was proof that the discovery had mattered, that choosing honor over easy money had been worth it. On the 1-year anniversary of the discovery, Marcus stood at the vault entrance with Daniel, Rachel, Sarah, and Emma. The Treasury Department had finished their audit, verified the inventory, and formally transferred the assets to the Restoration Fund. $275,643,822, now dedicated to helping veterans and their families. "Your father would be proud," Daniel said to Marcus. "He built something meant to last, and you made sure it did." "We all did," Marcus corrected. "This wasn't one man. It was everyone who believed, who fought, who refused to let it be buried again." They posed for pictures, the 5 of them, in front of the vault. But the photo Marcus treasured most was simpler. Just him and Emma, her wearing his purple heart on a chain, him with his arm around her shoulders, both of them smiling like they meant it. Later that day, a special ceremony was held. The 12 veterans who'd died after serving at Site 7 Delta were finally officially recognized. Their names were engraved on a memorial wall at the center. Their families received full benefits, retroactive to the date of death, and each one was posthumously awarded a special commendation for classified service. Helen Bradford stood in front of her husband's name, running her fingers over the engraved letters. "William," she whispered, "they finally see you." Thomas Hayes brought his own son, now a teenager, and pointed to his grandfather's name. "That's Lieutenant Robert Hayes," he said with pride. "He served his country, and he mattered." Marcus stood back and watched these families finally get acknowledgement, finally get closure. This was why he'd made the choice he'd made. Not for headlines or ceremonies, but for moments like this, when invisible sacrifices became visible again. And sometimes, late at night, Marcus would descend into the facility alone and stand in the vault. Not because he doubted it was real, but because he needed to remember, needed to feel the weight of what almost was and what actually became. He could have taken the money, could have disappeared, could have chosen himself over everyone else, and for one brief moment he'd been tempted. But his father had taught him duty, the army had taught him honor, and his daughter, watching from a distance all those years, had needed him to be someone worth believing in. So he'd chosen the harder path, the righteous path, and it had saved him. Anyone can find treasure if they're lucky enough to stumble into it. But it takes courage to protect it for others. It takes strength to look at fortune and see responsibility instead of opportunity. It takes a hero to be broken, forgotten, invisible, and still choose honor when no one's watching. As the desert night settled over the facility, Marcus Webb, former homeless veteran, current guardian of a legacy, stood in the vault and whispered a promise to his father, to his fallen brothers, to everyone the system had forgotten. "I see you, I remember you, and I'll make sure the world does too." Because some treasures aren't meant to be spent, they're meant to be shared. Some fortunes aren't measured in dollars, but in lives changed, in hope restored, in second chances earned. And some heroes don't wear capes or medals or even clean clothes. Sometimes heroes just refuse to quit, even when the world's given them every reason to. The end. Up next, 2 more powerful stories that will move you. Click now to keep discovering, and hit subscribe if you believe broken people can still do extraordinary things.